Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to come here today. I will be talking about the driving force. The central figure in every market economy is the individual, and an individual has to be able to develop in a certain direction so they have a stimulus to do something. They need motivation, motivation to invest and to develop further. So the original title of my paper was The Physiology of Greed, but Mrs. Flick has decided to make it more precise to say the physiology of greed. So what can we say about greed? In other words, we want to have enjoyment, ownership, and fulfillment of all of our desires should be done and fulfilled. And this is a more general definition. I find one that might fit even more better here, and that is to want to have material ownership irrespective of whatever benefit this may bring. So why do people strive for things? If they've got enough, why do they want more without having any personal benefit? And there are some ways of explaining this. Plato said that we have a desire for money, and this is insatiable. He was shown on the euro coin, and this was either good or bad for Greece. You can argue on that, but it's quite surprising how he was put on the coin. And now we have another one, Benjamin Franklin. He said, "Money never made a man happy yet." And the more the man has, the more he wants. And this guy has gone onto the $100 bill. So those who were most skeptical were shown on coins and bills. So the question is, what does money have to do with satisfaction or happiness? It's a central element in our market economy. And if you take a look at the World Happiness Report 2018, you'll see at the very top, you see the rich countries in the top percentile. And then you will see moving downwards, and if you correlate this with their GDP in each country, you'll see that they have a high GDP and they have a low GDP. So you could very simply say it's related to the country's income. That tells you how happy the people are. You were all looking for Germany. Here it is. It's number 15. It's about 3 slots behind Austria. That was a poll which was before the World Cup. I need to add that. Here you see the UK. But that brings us back to what we're talking about. Can you put it in such simple terms? We know that that doesn't work because here you can see an example from the United States. Since the 1950s, there's been an increase in personal income. And if we want to take a look at people's happiness or satisfaction, there is no correlation. The people's satisfaction remained pretty much constant. So you can't say the more money you have, the happier you are. It's not that easy. And why is that the case? If you have more and more money, that doesn't mean necessarily that you'll be more and more happy. Well, maybe there's something within us that prevents us to adapt to this. And there is. It exists, and you can see it. It's quite interesting. If you take a look, or you take some people and you say, imagine, how much chocolate could you eat? How many bars of chocolate could you eat right now? How many can you eat? You have to estimate. You could say, well, maybe they could manage 5 bars. Let's conduct an experiment. You can earn money or earn chocolate. You have to do something to earn your chocolate. But if you earn more than you can eat, then you have to give it back. So you have no benefit. Think in terms of this definition. So what you have to do was to manage to withstand noise. It was very unpleasant. That's what they had to do. The longer they could withstand the noise, the more chocolate they got. What was the result? The average was 11 bars. Although they said they could only eat 5, they had to give back 6. It makes absolutely no sense. This is it makes no sense to be able to put up with that noise for so long. But they wanted more. They wanted more chocolate. There are 2 income classes per unit noise. They got twice as much chocolate as the other group, but the time that they withstood the noise remained constant. So even if you get less, it's still a question of getting more. You know pictures like this. This is something that we have very early in our development. You always want more and more and more. Why is that the case? As we've developed in evolution and animals today, and it's not all that long ago that this has changed. And for us primates, we've always reached the limit. We've lived at the limit of what we needed to survive. We didn't have much surplus. It made sense for people to try to get as much as they could because there was only so much that they could just barely survive. But what are our drives? What drives us most? One is nutrition and the other one is reproduction. These are the 2 most important things in our lives. And this applies to us human beings as well. So you can compare this with animals. What frogs are thinking about, they're only thinking about eating and reproducing. Nothing else is important to them. And what role does money play here? Well, if I use him as an example if I can't come up with anyone better. Money is a surrogate. It's a surrogate for our desires, for nutrition, and we see this in advertising all the time. You can see what you can buy with money in order to fill our desires and our greed. Let me give you an example. The subjects were told that their annual salary for the same work would be $60,000. That would be their annual salary, and their colleagues would get $50,000 for the same job. The second scenario that you could decide for was you would get more money, $80,000, but your colleague would get $90,000. What do you think they decided for? It's perfectly clear. It's crazy, isn't it? But that's the way we are. In other words, a social comparison is very important to us, and it's all quite surprising. We take this to an extreme, and we take pictures of ourselves, post them on social media so that the peers that we compare ourselves will have to become larger, and the opportunity of being the greatest or make it possible for us to be the best. This is crazy, but this is what takes it even to a further extreme. The reason why we react like this is hardware. It's not what we were taught. It's hardware. It's installed within us, and it hasn't really changed. If you take a look at the brain of the frog we saw a few minutes ago, and we see all the parts of the brain where these mechanisms are controlled, it's hardly changed in evolution. You see the share of the total amount of the brain has changed. You can see that this is the neocortex that we have here, and this is on top. But these mechanisms here, these parts of our brain where all of these assessments are made, this has hardly changed at all. So here too, if you take a look at the apes and also the other kinds of apes as well. Now let me explain this to you very briefly. What are we talking about here? This is this part of the brain, that's the cortex, which sets us apart from all of the others. It's developed in a very special way. It's the most modern part of our brain, and this is important for the motor skills. And this is, you see the basal ganglia and the hypothalamus and the amygdala. Here we see that's for the emotions, and the hippocampus. This is for our memory. So what happens if we experience something positive? If a child eats chocolate, for example, here you have dopamine, and this has an impact on different parts of your brain, the frontal cortex, where we develop strategies. It also has an impact on the hippocampus. We say that this was something fantastic. It also has an impact on the emotional part of our brain so that we can remember this. You always need to have an emotional component. And we also see serotonin is also changed as well, too. And this is also in the brain. And this is related to the fact that whether or not I can become satisfied and saturated. I don't have to just eat chocolate. It's sufficient if I go to a cafe and I say, okay, only coffee, no sugar, you say to yourself. And there's somebody across from you and he's enjoying his chocolate torte. So that's sufficient to release all sorts of dopamine. So it's anticipating what it might taste like if you were to have that torte as well. So then you can say, okay, I'd like one of those as well. How does this work? Well, at the synapses, you see the dopamine is released, and it then leads to an electric transmission from here to here. This is the dopamine, and here is the receptor. They communicate with each other by means of nerve cells. And if you've taken cocaine, it has exactly the same effect as the chocolate torte or the money you see or what you order from Amazon. Here you see that you have an increased concentration of dopamine in this gap here. And there is a reduction in receptors, so you need more substance in order to have the same effect. In other words, with time, to be as satisfied as you were before you'd done all of that, you will need to increase the substance and to be happy as before. So you don't have any increase in happiness. It's a question of maintaining the basic feeling of happiness. And that's what's dangerous here, because you will tend to increase the amounts. So what we have here is an explanation for this. That's why we always want more and more of something we like and something that we want to enjoy. Another very important here are these stimulus. And these are very important for strategy and motivation. If you show the child where the chocolate is, then the child will develop a strategy as how to get there and how to get at it. And they'll put the car key in the key to the door. Children are quick learners, but we can also learn quickly as well. Don't be deceived there. And now, back then, everything was fine. The world was in very good order. It was not until those evil Europeans came that we then did away with all of the buffaloes. And that was because we were so greedy. But that's not quite correct. 10 to 50,000 years ago, we had a very large extinction of species. The majority of the large animals went extinct, and this is because the human beings spread. And you can see this in Australia very nicely. You can also see it in South America. In other words, the Aborigines or the natives, native Indians, were responsible for these large animals coming close to extinction, or even did go extinct. So everything is not okay. So people started thinking about how all of this works. What we have here is the hunter and their prey. They think, okay, the animals only eat as much as they really need. If not, they would eat until they can't eat anymore, and they would continue to reproduce if there weren't some limit. And Lotka, that's an Austrian mathematician, developed a model here, and you can see how the population of the prey and the hunter, and this is how they relate to one another. Here we have a mass number of hunters that died, and you can see that this is sort of self-regulating. Even if the animals want to take over the world on their own, they wouldn't be able to do so because they would run out of prey. And there's a parallel here that is parallel to human greed. And if we have limited resources and we also have limited greed, then we would only have a certain number of gold, a certain amount of gold, a certain number of tons of gold on the earth, and you could only be so rich, and you can only fulfill the wishes until none is left. And there is a major difference here in the digitized world, and this is that we no longer have these constraints. We can build up virtual worlds. We can earn as much as you want. You can introduce as many cryptocurrencies as you like, and no limits whatsoever. No more self-regulation. And this is where we need to be very careful. And that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I'd like to thank you all very much for your attention. And maybe we have time for a couple of questions, or is the time up? Thank you very much.